All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at a truly unprecedented legal defense, one that deconstructs a criminal charge using, of all things, physics, philosophy, and psychology. We are digging into the fascinating case of Dr. Chen Jingyuan. And what's so wild about this is that the defense didn't just stick to standard legal arguments. No, they used complex system sciences and cultural psychology to completely dismantle the accusations. And the stakes? They absolutely couldn't be higher. We're talking about an individual facing the very real threat of years in prison, and it all stems from a single click of a button on social media.
So, we have to start by asking the core question at the absolute heart of this case. Can a single online post literally crash a social order? In this situation, one single retweet led to severe criminal charges. The fundamental assumption the prosecution made here is that one tiny digital microaction by one individual can somehow snowball and bring down an entire macro social order. Honestly, it's a question that affects every single one of us who has ever hit the share button. Can your one tiny digital action actually trigger a systemic collapse?
To figure this out, we're going to break down the source material through 5 distinct lenses: the core legal conflict, language and logical fallacies, the physics of social chaos, a clash of cultures, and finally, policy and global implications.
Okay, let's kick things off with part 1, the core legal conflict, where we deconstruct the actual charge.
The specific charge in question here is often referred to as PXQT, or picking quarrels and provoking trouble. Now, according to the source analysis, this charge carries a massive burden of proof. The judicial system normally requires a 3-step structure to make this stick. First, you have the act itself, like posting the information. Second, the subjective intent. And third, and this is crucial, the result. It has to be proven that this specific act directly caused a severe disruption to public order. Usually, they measure that by looking at massive share counts or actual real-world panic.
And this is where things get really interesting, because the source points out a stark contrast between the prosecution's theoretical claims and the actual on-the-ground reality of the case. The prosecution argued that the act of retweeting caused severe disorder, but the defense, they brought the empirical receipts. Sure, the post existed, but it had zero spread, like literally nobody shared it. There was zero real-world impact. So the defense argued that if there is absolutely no consequence, well, the causal link automatically breaks. The required result for the crime simply never happened.
Which brings us to part 2, language and logical fallacies, or the semantic breakdown. The source analysis identifies these 6 systemic linguistic failures, basically arguing that the legal text in this case devolved into a sort of pseudo-legal discourse. Take semantic inflation, for instance. That happens when a word like information gets stretched so far that it includes absolutely everything, totally losing its legal boundary. Or consider failure of reference. That's when the legal documents claim there was severe public disorder without being able to point to a single actual event, or crowd, or consequence in the real world. According to the analysis, the words being used literally had no corresponding reality.
But maybe the most crucial point here is the category mistake. This is where the prosecution wrongly treated abstract political cartoons and theoretical ideas as if they were verifiable factual falsehoods. You know, in the philosophy of legal language, you can only label a descriptive statement like, say, it is raining outside, as true or false. But the source notes that the prosecution took expressive statements, things like subjective opinions, theoretical arguments, or satirical cartoons, and categorized them as false information. Actually, scratch that. It's worse than just miscategorizing. It's ignoring that you simply cannot apply a true or false binary to art or theory.
All right, let's step out of the courtroom and into part 3, the physics of social chaos, a completely different systems approach.
Okay, get ready for some physics. This quote introduces the fluctuation dissipation theorem. Basically, it suggests that chaos comes from a system's internal instability, not just a tiny outside push. The source analysis actually applies this hardcore physics theorem directly to social networks. It proposes that a social system's volatility isn't determined by an external force, like, say, one single user's retweet, but by the system's own inherent baseline of noise and fluctuation. Think about that for a second. It fundamentally flips how we usually think about social media virality and who is actually responsible for public panic.
To really visualize this, the source uses the brilliant analogy of Brownian motion. Imagine a tiny grain of pollen floating in a glass of water. It's constantly jiggling around because water molecules are naturally bumping into it all the time. That jiggling, that's your everyday internet noise. Now, if you apply a microscopic external force to that pollen, representing our one user's retweet, the way that pollen moves is still overwhelmingly dictated by the water's natural internal jiggling, not your tiny little push.
Taking this into network dynamics, we look at this variable m, which is the average number of shares a post gets per user. According to branching process theory in complex systems, if m is less than 1, meaning on average a person shares it with less than one other person, the spread is mathematically guaranteed to die out. The defense pointed out that for a marginal user with very few followers, their m is vastly less than 1. So to claim that a system-wide avalanche of chaos was triggered by them, mathematically speaking, it's essentially impossible.
Moving right along to Part 4, a clash of cultures, focusing on psychological misalignment.
The source materials highlight this profound misalignment in meaning between two totally different cognitive worlds. On one side, you have the academic, operating in what's called an open epistemic culture. Here, uncertainty is totally normal and information is just a text to be debated and analyzed. But on the other side, the sources characterize the judicial system as operating in a normative control culture. This culture demands absolute certainty. It views unimproved information as an active, dangerous threat, and it strictly categorizes everything into black and white, right and wrong.
And because of this, depending on which cultural framework you operate in, the exact same word takes on a radically different meaning. For the academic, retweeting a rumor or some controversial theory is just a way to participate in debate. It's a cognitive action. But for the normative control culture, a rumor is an inherently dangerous pathogen that has to be stopped immediately. The source highlights that because these two cultures have absolutely no translation mechanism between them, the defendant's academic behavior was completely re-encoded by the court as a malicious social threat.
Finally, let's zoom out for Part 5, Policy and Global Implications.
The source analysis points out a huge irony here. These hyperlocal judicial actions inadvertently undermine the state's own stated diplomatic and constitutional goals. By prosecuting the sharing of different political viewpoints, local authorities end up clashing with the national narrative of building a human destiny community, a concept that inherently promotes cultural exchange and diversity. Furthermore, the sources argue that treating academic or political debate as a criminal offense fundamentally challenges and even contradicts constitutional protections around free speech.
And here is a really fascinating paradox. Applying domestic criminal law to foreign political speech could unintentionally trigger international diplomatic friction. The sources note that some of the retweeted content in this case actually originated from foreign officials. So, by legally labeling those foreign official statements as rumors and punishing a domestic citizen for sharing them, the local court is essentially extending its jurisdiction into international political discourse, which, as you might guess, risks violating the very principles of non-interference that the nation's broader diplomacy champions.
So, we want to leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder. What happens to justice when an individual's cognitive framework operates on a completely different wavelength than the institution judging them? When a scholar using physics, statistical math, and philosophical reasoning is judged by a system built on rigid normative control and language inflation, are they even speaking the same language anymore? This case, as broken down by our sources, shows us that sometimes a legal battle isn't just about facts, it's a profound collision of science, language, and culture. It really makes you think about how the frameworks we use every day shape what we consider to be the truth. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the systems around you.